today we are going to talk about Hugh Le-Cain's music, and we're back in Cafe Oto.
We're back in Cafe Oto with the Nigerian high life going on behind us and the beautiful sunshine outside.
Yeah, luckily everybody wants to be outside, so we have
Yes.
more space today at Cafe Oto to record this. And last time we were in Guildhall School, now we are back home.
Yes, our spiritual home.
Okay.
So yes, this album by Hugh Le-Cain, I mean, it contains the first 14 tracks on the album are his real musical compositional output. And it's quite incredible stuff, isn't it? Especially when you take into consideration the time period.
Yeah, it is timeless, and the album is quite a wide range of things going on in it.
Well, the thing is that what's important about him is that he was like a lot. There was a lot of people in the beginning, first half of the 20th century, like Hugh Le-Cain, like Theremin, like Les Paul, like Raymond Scott. I mean, these guys who were as much scientists and instrument makers as they were artists themselves, you know.
Indeed. And Hugh Le-Cain did not want to call himself a composer to start with.
Yeah, he had this. There was that quote from him about what he considered himself. I've got it in front of me. I did not regard myself as a composer. However, I felt that the only way to understand the composer's interest in the apparatus was to try to use the equipment myself and in the various current musical forms.
Yeah.
I mean, if he was just doing it as studies, it's pretty impressive what he's done. He's obviously got such a deep feeling for the style and for the music. You know, it's incredible.
It is incredible, and he, I think, in a way, was an inventor. Not only an inventor of. Sorry, I got distracted by the black metal screen. But it's not black metal. An inventor of techniques, but also. Equipment.
I think his most important contribution is voltage control.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, our entire idea of analog synths, from everyone, from Moog, from Buchla, from Serge Tiretinin onwards, simply couldn't have existed without voltage control, and that's what Le-Cain came up with.
So he comes from a scientific background. He was part of the National Research Center in Canada with a degree in science. But that background helps him develop all of these approaches. That also paved the way indirectly for the development of the modular Moog synthesizer, among others. So that's why I would like to call him an inventor also. But also the techniques that we hear in this album, we can discuss each piece in more detail. They are also quite innovative for the time.
Incredibly innovative. This instrument that he created in the 40s, I mean 1945, he started work on this thing called the electronic sackbut, which is like, obviously, I mean, the guy had quite a sense of humour. Everything is laced with this self-deprecating humour all the time.
Yeah, that's.
Sackbut is a funny word, and it's an old medieval trombone.
Yeah, we see all this humour in the titles of some of the pieces, including the very famous piece, Dripsody, because it was written by a drip, or another title was a noisome pestilence. So all of these titles. So he was a person who developed a sense of humor.
Well, that's a funny thing, isn't it? Because of this collection, the first 13 pieces are really compositions like Dripsody and A Noisome Pestilence and all these things, where he's really, really drilling deep into and researching what his instruments and what the technology was capable of musically, which is really and quite stunning. And then there's a whole series of like humorous sketches which are dreadful, which are just like, just like gags, you know.
Yes.
And there's a version of Happy Birthday to You on there.
Yeah, it is. There was one of that.
Yeah.
I mean, there is also that's also like an approach towards mocking those traditions, maybe,
Yeah,
because there is
yeah.
also a manipulated version of a Christmas song. But what I see in those pieces is, including a piece called This Thing Called Key, is something we see in a later time, something really, really recent, something created by the artist Caretaker, aka Leland James Kirby, who was diagnosed with dementia at an early age. And in response to that, he created this series of music where he used quite old LPs, waltz recordings, 1920s, 30s, 40s records, and he manipulated them and with the deteriorating sound. And towards the end, it gets more and more deteriorated, and that reflects the illness and the process. But so going back to the Hugh McCain album, this Christmas piece, and including also the other piece, This Thing Called Key, they have the same technique. You can hear how eerie they get with the manipulations he was using, and that's a much earlier example of that. It's pretty good.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, he was creating creating equipment that was made manipulation of material. So, you know, the incredibly wide range of manipulation. I mean, this, what he referred to as a multi-track tape machine, which was the major piece of equipment he did Dripsody on, which is like the masterpiece, isn't it? Dripsody.
Yeah, that became a masterpiece because one reason is it is one of the first examples of musique concrète, one of the most famous examples for it. The other thing is it's made from just one sound of water drop.
One single drop that he selected, wasn't it? And then he used this piece of equipment that he called his multi-track tape machine, but it's not multi-track in contemporary sense, where you have one thick piece of tape with a series of different tracks, up to 24 different tracks, or even in certain cases 32 different tracks. It's actually separate pieces of tape that would run in sequence and in with a common speed control, which is quite bizarre and quite what's the word, unwieldy kind of thing to do.
It is, and the resulting sounds have all sorts of references for me. It can be eerie, but also there is still some humor in some of them.
Yes,
in that sense. For example, there is, I think it must be the Christmas piece or the following pieces. They have the speech manipulation vocoder effect, and that's again one of the possibly earliest examples of doing that, and it sounds like a music created by Daft Punk. Only that
yes.
it was created in 1950s.
Yeah.
So
Well, the references are, because he was ahead of the game because he was creating the technology that would make the sound worlds that other composers would use. The references are endless. I mean, I was hearing references to Daphne Oram, Terry Riley, Steve Reich, of course, with the rhythmic stuff.
yeah, he created these ostinatos with water drops, and that's reminded me of that kind of minimal, repetitive groove.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, really, really clever. But obviously, this thing of not considering himself a composer in his own right, it's a kind of it lets in the humour, but it also seems a bit restrictive in a way. That he could have gone a lot further. I mean, the list of instruments that he created. I mean, let's see if I've got it in front of me. Is quite enormous. I mean, this.
Like 8 different instruments.
Yeah, and there's one of the pieces on there that I think probably one of the ones I liked the most was this one, Eine kleine Klangfarben-Melodie, which of course again is another joke. It's playing pointing at Mozart.
Yeah, please take us through that.
Yeah, well, it's Eine kleine Nachtmusik reference, which is Mozart, and Klangfarben-Melodie is a term coined by Arnold Schoenberg. Using sound color melody, so creating melodies not from a change of pitch, but from the change of the timbre, from the change of the color of the sound, and and this is what he was doing with this fantastic piece of equipment he created called the Sonde, which he had 200 sine wave oscillators.
Wow!
Enormous, enormous bank of oscillators. And so the sound is incredibly rich and complex.
Yeah.
These clouds of pitches, and it is changing in colour all the
That's
time.
so ahead of its time.
Bizarre.
I mean, it's ahead of today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's massively.
Bizarre also, yeah.
Yeah. And and I think for me that was the one, that was the piece that really, really got me, as that had the kind of expressive depth, because he's the self-deprecating thing, and because he's laughing at himself as a composer a lot.
Okay.
This one seems to get over that, and seems to be a really, 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 really touching piece of music.
Yeah. And all these instruments that you mentioned are working in connection with one another. It's not a standalone setup. It's like an orchestra that he created with these electronic instruments that he invented.
Yeah.
And one of the pieces I would like to make a reference, actually, the one that's called Nocturne. Doesn't that remind of what we discussed in the previous episode? One of the Asem Maria Perde pieces.
Yeah.
I feel there are certain sonorities that explore the similar C's with the expanding sounds. The tonalities are also sharing some similarities, but also repetitive and endings, sudden endings of sounds. So I felt that kind of connection between them, but though they're created in different places.
Yeah, at different places, but it's very similar time, isn't it? It's 1962, and well, that's the feeling, is that these pioneers, these people were mostly simultaneous. I mean, one thing that got me was that one of the pieces really reminded me, the 99 Generators from 56 reminds me so much of, in the sound world, reminded me so much of Poème Électronique, Gavarez. which was 1958.
Yes.
So Lecain is like sort of 2 years ahead of everyone.
Yeah, he was almost like foreseeing what everybody was going to do. Of course, Poème Électronique is a milestone in electronic music, and that's what's quoted for also for the performance in Philips Pavilion, which was not well received by public though. But Hugh Lecain already imagined those kinds of sounds, but not many people knew about them him at the time, and also. I don't know, again, he may not be getting as much mention as he deserves in today's stories or talks about electronic music history. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to include him for our podcast, but also the music is sounding so interesting.
It's absolutely fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And there's a couple of them that are really, truly beautiful. And we simply cannot ignore the fact that our entire idea of what a synthesizer is relies entirely on voltage control.
Yeah.
And and Lecain came up with that. So, every synthesizer, even to a degree, even the digital synthesizers, but all the analog synthesizers are based on the idea of a voltage control oscillator, voltage control amplifier, voltage control filters. And this is all his work.
Yes.
So...
we are talking about someone who's extremely important for the development of synthesizers.
Yeah. So he's created the sound world of the 20th century, really.
He did.
And then, stupidly, killed himself on a motorbike.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. It's so tragic. The ending, sadly an accident.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's again, these 20th century characters, a bit like, again, I think I felt a lot of references to Leon Theremin with Hugh Lecain. Someone who was incredibly technically talented, but also deeply musical, but with a bizarre, mad streak in their character. Also. Lecain worked on military stuff, didn't he? He worked on radar during the war,
true.
which is something that Theremin did. But he was obsessed with speed. Lecain. He was, would drive his motorbike famously as fast as possible.
Which didn't end up in a good way.
It's never going to end up.
No.
it's gonna, yeah. That's what, and he was only. It's quite incredible when you think about what he left behind. He was only 63 when he killed himself on the bike.
Yeah. Happy we have access to these recordings, and somebody compiled them under the title of Compositions, Demonstrations, 1946, 1974. And it opens with what we've been talking about, Rhapsody. And what is so special about this piece is not only because it's one of the most common and pioneering examples for music concrete, but also the technique. So one thing I've been exploring in my own research, which then reflects to my own music, is the value of limitations. It's not a new phenomenon to say that limitations can have creative value. In my research, it was more in the context of chiptune, but I implement that in other parts of life, and in this piece, in Rhapsody, he uses just one water droplet sound. And I think that would give you a big picture of that sound and a focus on how to work with it. Then, when you have one small thing, when you study it, you delve deeper and further into it. And that's what he did. What he did was, he did that. He took a long recording of this water droplets with a metal wastebasket.
It's a metal wastebasket, wasn't it? And he was dropping water into it from a fixed height.
Yeah.
And then when he got the whole recording, he just chose one droplet.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
was the
just one droplet over a recording of it with a duration of how long? must be hours and hours.
Yeah, and he just
So, and then it took him quite a long while to work with this one water droplet sound, but he did turn it into many things. He turned it into an ostinato, and he explored also the space, the right and left and other spaces for how to position that sound.
Well, I remember when we listened to this, when we listened to Dripsody in the studio at the Guildhall, when we recorded the last podcast. Hearing it on those nice big monitors in that nice room.
Yes.
The low frequency warmth, the depth.
Wow, yeah.
You know, when you take
to note that.
when you take a real sound that has a full bandwidth and you tune it down octaves upon octaves is what you did.
Yeah.
You know, you got the power in there. The low frequencies is really something quite special.
Imagine they play this piece in the ambisonic system in eclectic.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic.
They should arrange some listening session for all these pieces we are discussing, and this should be the opener.
Yes,
because I can imagine the exploration of space, but also the frequency range is so good that it would work out very well in a surround setup with a subsystem.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, it also, you know, the source sound itself, you know, with a water droplet, it's a bit like, in some ways, it's quite similar to a synthesized kick drum in that it's a sweep.
Yes.
So it starts with a well, in this case, the water droplet starts with the low sound that goes high very quickly, and that creates the kind of click. With the kick drum, it's the opposite way around. It starts very high and goes very low. But it means that you have a sweep of pitches within this tiny little thing, and it's a bit like, you know, maybe this is a bit of an obvious truism, but it's like the William Blake thing of seeing eternity in a grain of sand.
Yeah.
You know, that within just one little event like that, there's an enormous amount of material. But again, you know, with his self-deprecating approach to being a composer, big parts of Dripsody, it's just a pentatonic scale, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe that's part of the humor approach also.
It's like it has these incredibly complex things. It's like, well, I'll just play the black notes then.
Yeah, I'm sure there is some humor aspect there too.
Totally, yeah. But a very special piece. Well, I think they all, until he starts being deliberately humorous, or until he starts getting jazz musicians to play on his instruments, which was the other thing that's in this collection. When it's just his own compositions, there is something quite profound going on there, and it's not just technique. There is something, there is something emotional in there. You know, there's something quite powerful on a compositional level.
There is, and when I mentioned this artist Caretaker, where I saw the parallel with what Caretaker created. Has a lot of emotion and also some dark feelings, and I can actually feel that in this music also sometimes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of depth in it.
Well, that might be the slightly self-destructive, mad aspect of his personality, of like why he was such a, you know, like desperate need for speed on his motorbikes.
A motorbike that killed him. So that's what it sounded that.
I mean, just this hadn't occurred to me before, but just talking about it now made me feel there's a lot of, also in terms of being an inventor as well, there's a lot of references with Joe Meek here. You know, that's the British pop producer Joe Meek, who was ended up again dying very young, but his imagination and his need to expand possibilities meant that he was inventing EQs, he was inventing compressors, and in his own work there is this very odd humour as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the March of the Globots and this science fiction.
Much younger, 37 years old.
Yes, he killed his landlady, then killed himself. Not far from here, just on Holloway Road.
Oh my God!
Yes, it's local. Well, maybe we could do a podcast about Joe Meek.
Maybe let's do that.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you so much for joining again.
Yes, thank you everyone for listening, and go and listen to Hugh's stuff and give thanks for creating the synthesizer.
Yeah, don't forget that he invented a lot of things, please, in what you listen to today.